Hello everyone, welcome to the 7th episode of G.GOES Live, my weekly show. I'm very happy to have my very good friend Elias for the second time. This is a very special edition, one of the best maybe so far, because we're talking about something really important, which is synthesis. And we are going, of course, to discuss synthesizers, synthesis, the different methods of creating sounds, etc. And also we are going to be talking about a course that Elias is launching soon at Per-vurt. How are you, Elias?
Habibi Mo, مشتاق لك. Nice to see you again and again.
Arabic. So how is your summer so far?
Well, the summer is going to be hardcore. We're preparing it. Many projects to come. Some live performances, some tribe parties and private parties, and a lot of bookings and yeah.
And you have another live show again with...
I'm actually, yeah, we're doing an Atomic Circus performance on the 29th of July at Skin City. It's going to be sunset live set, so we're adapting it to sunset. And yeah, so we're sound designing again.
So that's the topic.
It's almost the same songs, but it's like a total mood, and it's funkier. It's gonna be more like disco-ish, funky stuff, jazzy. You know, a bit of everything.
Great, and you're in the process of always designing new sounds.
We're constantly designing, sound designing, processing, working on the flow, trying to enhance our setup to be even more comfortable and to be able to like have more control on the machines. And yeah, since I got back,
you were in Africa?
Yes, I was in Africa and Ivory Coast. I had a gig, and I thought it's a great opportunity to just take a holiday, like you know, I have been working so much for the past 9 months. It was perfect.
You had a gig also in
I had a gig in Ivory Coast, in Abidjan. It's a very small scene, but very cool crowd.
With the magic
very
of
well
Africa
educated. Yes, it's mystical. I spent 10 days by myself on an island.
So
didn't meet anyone on the beach. So yeah, it was like I felt like I was
maybe you're more
Robinson
influenced.
Crusoe. So
yeah, maybe you came back with more ideas of
definitely
new sounds.
A lot of inspiration, a lot of ideas. Cleared my mind. You know, I just feel good.
Nice.
After Africa.
So we expect something even way bigger now with all your live acts and with your partner Ziad Sarouh as well.
Oh,
we salute him.
Of course, Ziad Sarouh is a main asset in my very important and influential person in my life, and I've learned a lot of things from Ziad. He knows
a lot,
everything. Yeah, I mean, no one knows everything, but he has so much knowledge about synthesis, analog synthesizers, production, sound design, everything. So
that's great, and I
salute Ziad.
We salute him, of course, and I hope I have him one day as well for the G.GOES Live. He's very busy, he travels a lot. That's
he travels a lot. He also works in production, like ads and advertising. Yeah, and but yeah.
I learned from the previous interview that I had with you that you don't just use when of course you're preparing for the live show, or even when you're producing something, you spend a lot of time designing some sound rather than just go to a plugin, use the presets, or just use sounds that are always there. Like it's a cliche nowadays to use a lot of sounds that we know. We hear like tracks, that's a sound that I heard from that track, etc. So I know that you spend a lot of time doing something called synthesis, and that's what we are going to talk about tonight. About synthesis.
It's all about synthesis. We said this is what tonight is going to be about. Synthesis, sound design, processing, because you know, when you use a preset, most of the time, I mean, you can sound design it and tweak it up, but still a lot of people use the preset. So we usually go from scratch, from nothing, and we start creating the sound. Sometimes the sound takes an hour, sometimes it takes 3 hours. Sometimes
But
it
you
takes
come
5
up
minutes.
with an
Well,
original sound.
Yeah, as long as we're agreeing on the same sound, because sometimes Ziad likes the sound, I don't like it. Sometimes I like the sound and Ziad doesn't like it. So as long as we agree, and yeah, so trying to make the best out of it. And also, I think that we shouldn't get attached to a particular sound because we can always do a better one. So
And maybe you can use those sounds that you don't use specifically now. For example, you can use
of course,
later on, because
of
that
course.
has a lot of investment and
Of
time
course.
as well.
Even the sound you created, you can change it
you can
later
change it,
on.
exactly.
And
We are
you know,
going
do
to
an
talk a lot
adaptation.
about
Exactly.
this tonight. So again, we welcome you guys on this 7th episode. I know a lot of you are joining now, and we have a lot of people watching now, and you can also watch this episode after 2 days after we do the editing. We're shooting now with multiple cameras with HD as well, and the video will be uploaded to the Facebook page, the Per-vurt Facebook page, and you can also watch all other episodes there in a playlist called G.GOES Live. So the purpose of this session tonight is, of course, synthesis, and I can see that a lot of people are nowadays doing live performance. And the good thing about synthesis in general is that you come up with your own signature of sound. You have something new and original and stuff like that, and that's something we would like to increase the awareness about. That's why also Elias is launching a course about that at Per-vurt soon. We will update you, of course, about all the details. So let's start first of all with when you want to design, for example, a certain sound. You prefer to use hardware, analog synthesizers, or you just do it in the box as using plugins?
Listen, it depends. Usually, when I'm producing like tracks that I would like to play as a DJ, or not necessarily myself, but that I would want to release on a label, I usually work in the box and out of the box. So which means I use analog machines, sometimes like hardware, but they're digital. And a lot of the processing goes, mainly the processing is in the box. So like adding distortion, you know, LFOs, even sometimes LFOs. Most of the time, LFOs I use LFOs in the hardware.
In the hardware.
In the hardware. Yeah. So it's a bit of both. Now for the live act, mainly we're using hardware, like I said, drum machines, sequencers, pedals, effectors, Mooger Foogers, a lot of machines actually, and everyone has its particular signature and sections, and some have one oscillator, so some others have 2, 3. And also the different types of modulation, different timbres.
You mentioned
voices,
so many keywords that we are going to discuss. If for you guys who don't know exactly what we're talking about, those terminologies, those are the main components or the main features of a synthesizer, whether it's a digital plugin or whether it's a machine, an analog device or whatever. So you start always with an initialized preset, which is no preset.
It's no preset.
It's just you go directly to something called an oscillator.
Exactly.
Great. So
which is a VCO.
VCO. That's the voltage controlled oscillator. So what does the oscillator do basically? It generates a sound.
It accepts electric voltage. And yeah, it generates different types of waveforms.
Great.
Which are the sine wave, the sawtooth, the triangle wave, and the noise.
Those are the main ones.
The main one, yeah. The main
and you can, of course, morph them. You can just blend them together.
You can blend 2, 3 oscillators together. Each oscillator has a volume as well, and yeah, that's mainly it.
That's the main engine of creating
a sound. Yeah.
And if you have, for example, a synthesizer with just one oscillator, that would be a monophonic synth.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
You've got to play one key at a time.
Yeah, a monophonic synthesizer usually
used for bass.
Yeah, mainly bass, synth, stabs. So yeah, monophonic is usually
one voice.
Is a one voice synthesizer. Geophonic is two-voice synthesizer, and then you have the polyphonic synthesizer.
Poly or para as well.
Or paraphonic that has up to 4 to a lot of voices.
So we started with the engine of creating this vibration of sound. This we call this oscillation. And you choose, for example, from a wave table, you choose which type of wave. You mentioned sine wave, square wave, sawtooth, and triangular, and stuff like that. So, and each one, by the way, it has its own characteristics. Some of the waves are just the fundamental note or fundamental sound. Some of them they have harmonics. Some of them they don't have. But after you oscillate a waveform, so where do you go with the sound? Because the synthesizer, it has many components. So where the sound, where does it go?
I could use the filter, which is the
VCF,
and there's also the VCA.
That's the amp,
which is the amp of the synthesizer.
And they are all voltage
There's also the ADSR, which is the attack. And what's cool about it, that in some sense you can modulate all these parameters.
Great.
You know, and you can, in some also other like synthesizer, you can do up to 8 to 12 modulations at the same time. But also it's very tricky because most of the time a lot of modulation could become disturbing, and you know, it's nonsense. So
exactly.
I think it's better to spend time on, especially when you're modulating, and find the right parameters to be able to get the best out of it.
Exactly, because some people, they have a synthesizer, for example, whether it's an analog device or hardware or a plugin, but they just spend time tweaking things without knowing the actual staging of that sound, when it comes out of the oscillator and where does it go, etc. So tonight we are going to explain this, if we can call it like a roadmap, from generating the waveform from an oscillator to the end result, to coming out of the amp. Of course, you have to make it louder at the end of the day, and of course we can add a lot of things like Elias said, the modulation and the envelopes and stuff like that. So as Elias said, after the oscillator, which is the VCO, the voltage control oscillator, we go into a VCF. That's a voltage also controlled filter.
Exactly.
Now inside the filter, what is it exactly about? What is a filter?
It's about finding the right frequencies and
cut them out. And
sometimes cut them out, sometimes bring them back. But it depends how much you want to bring them back and cut them out.
Great.
There's also the resonance that gives it a bit more
saturation.
Yes, not really saturation, but it gives more character, if you want.
Adds a cutoff point.
Yeah, of course.
Maybe you can add a drive as well.
Yeah, which is cool about this is that you can also modulate these parameters.
So
an LFO,
another LFO, maybe LFO 1, LFO 2.
LFO 2, some things have one
many.
LFO, many LFOs, 2 LFOs, yeah, it depends.
Great, so inside this filter, by the way, guys, the VCF is a filter control that can cut out or bring back, as Elias said, some frequencies from this waveform that was generated from the oscillator. And inside the filter, you have a lot of filter types.
Exactly.
So what's the first one that comes to mind?
The low-pass filter.
Low-pass filter.
Low-pass filter, high-pass filter, and the
band-pass
filter.
And the notch.
And yeah, there's a notch and the low shelf filter, and what else? There's
the noise, maybe.
The noise, yeah. So but mainly what I use most of the time is the low pass and the band pass filter.
Band pass that you cut from both sides.
You cut from both sides also, and if you modulate that band pass filter, so you can move the frequencies.
Exactly, and we will talk about modulation as well in this episode. So in this filter, as Elias also said, we have cutting shelf, like cut off, like those filter types, whether you want to cut from the right side, which is the high frequency. And by the way, that's not only cutting high frequency, because you can keep on cutting from the right side until you reach only the low frequency. So that's what you cut also high and mid. And you have, that's called the low pass filter. It lets the frequencies on the low end pass and cut the opposite frequencies.
It's like also sometimes using an EQ, you know. A
exactly.
filter could be used as an EQ, and an EQ could be used as a filter.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So.
And at the cutoff point, which is the point at which you start to cut frequency, that's called the cutoff point. And by the way, a lot of people, when they own synthesizers, I only see them play with the cutoff filter, and it has the biggest maybe designed knob.
Yeah.
But that's not synthesis. That's not all about synthesis, to just cut off frequencies and bring them back, etc. Whether you choose a low pass or high pass filter. So if you're using a low pass filter, you're kind of making the sound lose a lot of high frequencies, going darker a little bit.
It's mainly to, like, you know, make the sound evolve in the track, and you know, it's all about automating the sound.
Going from one side,
going from one actually from one part of the track to another. So you can start with a low pass filter on a pad and bring it up until, you know, you have the main part of the track.
That's a way of building up something.
Sometimes it's with the drums, it's a high pass filter, so you're on a break and you're bringing up the drums, so you cut all the low frequency that includes, let's say, toms, snares and everything. And so you high pass it and bring it up. It does a cool effect.
Even
cool build up.
Even in DJing, when you DJ, you use the filter as well.
Of course.
But the most maybe filter is the high pass filter.
In DJing, it's high pass actually. It's
you cut the kick and the bass and bring them back.
It's like you're making a break, you know. But also could be very tricky to use a lot the filter, you know, because some DJs tend to use a lot of effects and the filter. I think
they overdo it.
Yeah, they overdo it. And I think it's wrong, because the producer already spent so much time creating this track.
Exactly.
You're
and
not here to change it, you know.
Exactly. Yes.
If you want to change it, you can edit it in Ableton or remix it or do a bootleg. But I think filters and the effects should be used carefully at the right time and in the right part of the track.
And of course, for DJs who are familiar with this, like using filters, note one thing, that whenever you're switching the filter on, turning it to left or right side, whether you're doing high pass or low pass, you are just adding more volume, more saturation on the sound. That's because how the filter is designed in DJ mixers. You cannot control something called Q, which is the cut-off angle of your filter. So make sure when you're using the high pass or low pass, just try to lower the channel a little bit, because you are giving a lot of saturation on the output.
Also be careful about the resonance. Don't open the resonance to the maximum, because it would sound very naughty.
Unfortunately, in DJ mixers, we don't really have, in most of the DJ mixers nowadays, a resonance option, which is this angle on the cutoff point, whether you can boost it or not. Maybe they can implement some in the commercial mixers for DJs, because I see whenever I go out clubbing, I hear this huge saturation, and this can it can deteriorate the speaker somehow.
Think this is just I think also it comes with experience, with a lot of gigs, you know, and I personally don't like using a lot the
filters,
the effects and filters, you know. That's why I mostly ask for Rain or an Allen and Heath Zone 92 that has no
effects on the side.
I like the filters though, but again, also I'm against, like I said, I'm against overdoing.
Yeah, and we talked about the filter section in the synthesizer, but after, of course, the VCO, we are in the VCF, and then after the VCF, we have another component, which is the VCA. That's the voltage control amplifier. Yes. Exactly. So in the VCA, mainly it's all about the volume and loudness in this envelope, but in this component. But there's something very interesting about the VCA, which you can link, of course, to it, which is an envelope.
Exactly.
ADSR.
This attack, decay, sustain,
and release. I hear a lot of people, they ask me a lot of questions about what is this ADSR. Some people, they have t-shirts with ADSR.
Now is the time to answer.
Now it's the time to answer. So you have the attack, the decay, the sustain, and the release. You want me to talk about it? Okay, so this is also, I teach a lot at Per-vurt and sound design section of the Master Certificate program, and it's a very important aspect of the synthesizer, because at some point you want to imitate or make the sound like more human, and add some fade in, for example. Like the attack is measured in milliseconds. It's a time it measured in time, and this is the time it takes for the sound to reach the maximum volume after you press on a note. You want to play a certain note, you press on it. If the attack is 0, then you get to the maximum volume of this note instantly. If you have, like, for example, 2 seconds of attack, then you have a sweep in, a fade in, and the sound.
It introduced the sound a bit later than...
Exactly, that's like you're writing a fade
curve,
in curve, etc. And after you reach the maximum volume of we call the attack, you have decay and sustain. And I always call them like brother-sister because they work together.
The twins.
The twins. If the sustain is a new level of volume that you can reach after you reach the maximum volume. And if it's at 0 dB, which is no change, then the decay and sustain, they don't do anything. So the longer you're pressing on the note, you're keeping the maximum volume you reached when you played the note. So the decay is the time also. It's measured in time. The time it takes for the sound to move from the maximum volume to a new volume we call sustain. Usually it's in a negative value if you want the sound to go down. And then finally you have the release, which is, as it says, when you release your finger from the note you're playing, how much time does it take for the sound to die, to stop?
To just fade out.
So it resembles, it sounds like a reverb maybe if you remove your finger and the sound takes more time.
It's like it has a tail. It gives you the impression that it has a tail,
Exactly.
Reverb is more a kind of echo, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
It comes from echo, so actually, yeah.
It's like echo delay, all those things are just different naming. Because
but yeah, sometimes it sounds the same, yeah.
Because when you have, for example, a reflection, those are all reflection-based devices, whether it's a reverb or delay or a chorus or whatever, and they have different categories based on the time it takes for the sound to get reflected back to your ears.
Exactly.
And in this we talk about a lot of psychoacoustic in the course as well. So your brain, for example, is designed to hear 2 sounds in a time that is longer than 23 milliseconds. So if it takes less than 23 milliseconds for the sound to be reflected from a source coming back to you, then you don't hear 2 sounds, but actually those are 2 sounds or more, and you cannot hear two sounds. So that's when we get into something called reverb, and they call it, for example, chorus or flanger, etc., etc. So we talked about VCO, VCF, VCA. We talked about the envelope, and there's one more component. Of course, those are not the only components in the synthesizer, but we're talking about in general what you see, what you find. And by the way, you can have more than one VCO, more than one VCF.
Of course.
And we reach something called LFO, which is the low frequency oscillation. I am pretty sure that Elias uses a lot of LFOs when the time for him is perfect.
I mean, with Ziad, of course, and in my production, a lot of LFOs, cutting frequencies, just modulating the filter with an LFO, modulating the pitch of an oscillator with an LFO. You know, it's you can even modulate an effect with an LFO, a delay or a reverb, or even an ADSR as well. So it's so wide, and you can do so many things. If you have 3 LFOs, you can also modulate all of these parameters together. So,
and in the LFO, you also in the LFO you have many options, many components. Like you have the rate of the LFO, which gives
you exactly the time of
how fast
you want it to modulate, and there's also the depth.
The depth, of course, yes, which is how far from the original sound you want to go, whether how far from the original volume, if you're linking the LFO to the volume, or how far you're going from the original pitch, if you're modulating the pitch, etc. As Elias said, you can link the LFO to many things, not only to volume. You can link it to panning, for example. So
you can link it to anything.
Anything, actually, because in Max for Live you have a device called LFO.
LFO, and it's automatic.
You
LFO,
can link
which means instead of playing on the synthesizer, you have a small groove, and the LFO is doing the movement already. So you haven't done anything yet, and the track is moving. It's changing.
Yeah, that's the keyword, by the way. LFO is all about having some movement in the track, taking the sound to a side and then a side.
I'm not saying richer.
Exactly. I don't mean side as in panning left and right, but you know, when we talk about modulation, LFO, you are generating a low frequency it's a low frequency oscillator. You're generating a frequency which is maybe below 20 hertz that you don't hear, by the way. It doesn't go to your amp. But this wave, because it has a cycle of compression, if I don't know if you can see, cycle of compression and then cycle of rarefaction, and the plus and negative side.
Waveforms, yeah.
Waveform. So you link the positive side, which is the compression of a normal waveform, to take a certain feature to a side. Let's say you're modulating the panning. The positive side will take the sound to the left, and when you have a negative side, it takes the sound to the right. So that's when you create an automatic, it's called modulation of a certain aspect. And what's your best modulation? On what? On filter?
I can't really tell you. Sometimes on a filter it doesn't sound really good. Sometimes it sounds good on a pitch, the pitch of the LFO. Sometimes it sounds good on a resonance of the filter. So it's like
they all get combined together.
Yeah, they all
somehow
get combined. It's very detailed, you know what I mean? So it all depends. Everyone, it's his own taste. So as long as you're convinced with the modulation it sounds good, then you should go for it.
And by the way, we have been talking about a method of synthesis, which is going from an oscillator to a VCF, eliminating some frequencies. When we say eliminating, we're talking about one way of synthesis, which is called subtractive synthesis. Yes. So you're kind of subtracting elements like frequencies and stuff.
Exactly.
And we have a lot of other methods, but the main one is the subtractive synthesis, which we will also be, Elias, be teaching about mainly.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of other ways of synthesis, like
you have additive synthesis.
Additive synthesis.
You have wavetable synthesis and FM synthesis.
That's a frequency,
which is very known as well. And
so many other
maybe granular synthesis.
And the granular, you take a grain, like a very small portion of a sample, you loop it maybe, and it can generate a certain sound. And we're using this a lot, by the way. Sometimes you can synthesize a sound by using just any sample or sound and pass it through a lot of effect devices, and then those effects become self-oscillating effects. So they take a certain sound that's already there, and by applying so much effect to it, you're generating a totally new sound. Do you use that sometimes? You mentioned the Moog.
The Mooger Fugger, yes. Ring modulator and MIRF, MIDI MIRF. So I usually use the MIDI MIRF on my drum machines. So it has a sequencer. It's like also it's a kind of filter that cuts frequencies. You remove the exact frequency you want. It's like a sequencer, so it's like if you want, it has faders, like a mixer, and whenever you
push it
bring
in
it up or in, so it starts modulating the drums. You know, it makes it also richer. Huh?
And that's something. If someone wants to know how you did this, I don't think it's possible nowadays to know how a certain producer did this and that, because it has.
No, I mean, sometimes you can. Try to guess, you know, like it sounds like a reverb with a pre-delay or modulation on the pitch. There's so many ways of just sound designing and producing, but usually the main stuff like reverb, delay, panning. These are stuff that you can hear.
Exactly, you can guess,
and sometimes you can think it's a reverb
but
or
it's not.
panning, but it's not. You know what I mean? So everyone his own technique. I think every single producer has
his own way,
his tricks, and that's it.
Great.
They all know the basics, but with practice and like just experimenting, they. Sometimes you do by mistake. You understand stuff. You know.
That's what we call it a good mistake. Or happy mistake.
So I mean, the best sounds we've came up with a lot of times were mistakes. We didn't understand how we just like
by trial
how
and
it was created, and it's cool. It's pleasant.
And are you excited to share your knowledge with
course,
a mini course?
I mean, that's the main purpose. You know, I'm passionate about it. I see that there's a lot of people who are really interested in all of this. So.
And thank you for the trust and giving it at Per-vurt.
You know, since the first day you started the video, I called you right after the video. I told you I really believe in this project and I would love to be part of it. And here we are.
Thank you so much for that, and I know how much you support everything related to increasing awareness and like in synthesis, in DJing, in everything. I'm pretty sure that if anyone asks you anything, you would directly answer and with a lot of with pleasure.
Of course.
So we're done with the biggest part of synthesis, which we're discussing, by the way, a subtractive synthesis. And then you have in the synthesizer, you have something called a global setting, or exactly.
You have the glide, which is like a portamento as well. It gives you the feeling of a pitch change, but it doesn't work on a like if you're, let's say you're playing notes 4 on 4, like, you know, on the first step of each bar. It doesn't work like this, especially when notes are close
or overlapping
each other. This is where you can use the glide portamento kind of.
I use it as well in creating those, for example, kind of risers or endless rising
and it gives
sound.
you like also a slide sometimes from a note to another, you know.
Yeah. So if you play 2 notes at the same time and you add this glide option from one note from the first octave and one note from the last octave, maybe the sound will start gliding.
Yeah, it's like if it fades in from a sound to, like, you know, from
it's a nice effect.
From a note to another. It's a great effect, and also sometimes it could sound like not good at all. So again, it depends. You need to spend time. It depends what you want, and I mean, you can modulate anything, and if it works, it works. There's also, like we said, the voices. So some synths are 4-voice synthesizers.
4-voice meaning you can
play 4 notes at the same time, and like I've got the Prophet 8, which is an 8-voice, so you can play with the
chords.
2 hands. You know, you can play chords, and yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Great, and you have a lot of features, by the way. Each synthesizer, it has its own like extra feature or whatever. Like, for example, you might have a sequencer in a synthesizer or an arpeggiator. So
yeah, like in the Mother 32, or also in the Matrix boot that we just got, which is a monster, by the way. Because also what I like about the synth, which is a bit different from the others, it has a sequencer, and you can modulate every single step in that sequencer. So on a step you can put modulation on the cutoff. I don't know, the one after you, it's the resonance of the filter.
It's a matrix.
Yeah, so you can really combine so many modulations in just one sequence.
We can work on it one day, because
of course I would love to do some demos sometimes, or maybe do a workshop together.
Yes, of course. And by the way, we wanted to announce this later on, but we are also planning, me and Stam, to do some special editions of G.GOES Live, which is hardware edition.
Yes.
So we're spotting a GoPro or whatever on a certain hardware, and we're demonstrating how you can, maybe we can use the matrix. By the way, we have the matrix here, and that's the beast.
You have everything here.
This is what we're going to use. I was very happy that Ziad and Elias, they got it at the end. And it's really one massive synth, because you can do so much in it.
It's crazy.
And when it comes to arpeggiators, for example, you can have this option in a synthesizer, whether it's a plugin or some synthesizers, they have arpeggiator sequencers. So you can use the arpeggiator to create some, maybe a chord, whether it's, instead of being like 3 notes playing at the same time, those notes will be split into arp, like something like this. So instead of being just 3 notes and 1 chord, they will start to arpeggiate, going from up to down, or down to up. You have so many patterns,
or sometimes up, down, up. So yeah,
many features.
It's very interesting.
Do you use the Moog Sub 37?
I don't have the Sub 37. I have the Mother 32.
I was just looking if we can find for you guys some new features that we did not talk about.
This is a duophonic synthesizer, paraphonic synthesizer.
And it has a lot of other stuff. We can go through some synthesizers later on in the special edition of G.GOES Live that we will be launching some other time, of course.
There's something I also forgot to mention, that you've got also some semi-modular synthesizer where the modulation goes through patching. So you patch, like you send, just put a cable that goes, let's say, from an LFO to the pitch of the oscillator. So this is how you do the modulation instead of going into the digital screen of synthesizer, or sometimes it's just a button that you switch, you know.
It's great to have modular sometimes, or semi-modular, because if you have a synthesizer, they link already the LFO, for example, to do effect on, for example, the filter. That's designed by default, maybe. But when you have a modular or semi-modular, you can just send this LFO to wherever you want. You're not obliged to use it for the filter or pitch. You can use it anywhere. It's just a cable, because at the end of the day, you're working with electrical signal.
Yeah,
it's electricity.
Exactly.
Generating electrical
You can trigger stuff from a drum machine, like a bass that you've done on a modular that goes with the sequence of the let's say the rim shot, like in the 909, the new 909. There's CV out, gate in. So we'll explain
so
these
many things
in the course.
CV and gate, they sometimes they can act as, you know, like MIDI triggers or pulse trigger or whatever. And this is when you can link or send some patterns from one synthesizer to another. And of course, we would also talk later on about the MIDI aspect of a synthesizer, because it has a built-in keyboard. And when you start playing on the keyboard, you're actually triggering some pitches, different pitches based on each note. Each note has a exactly. And if you have a if you have like a rack edition of a synthesizer which doesn't have a keyboard, that's okay, because you can link any MIDI controller.
Yeah, MIDI controller, yeah, through MIDI in, MIDI out. So
exactly. Yeah. So you can use one main keyboard, and you can play from this keyboard on many synthesizers.
And there's also the MIDI through, where you can also synchronize, take a clock from a synth and send it to another synth, so they can be synchronized together.
Or like duplicate the input to have two outputs,
but that's it. There's different ways. So you can trigger through CV out, you can trigger through drum machine. There's also, like I said, through the MIDI inputs and outputs of a synthesizer. It's endless.
He is making me so excited now to maybe to start jamming. And by the way, we will jam. My studio is almost done. By the way, the studio is not yet launched.
You should come check it.
You should come check it. Yes,
it's beautiful.
And we have a lot of stuff going on, and you can jam sometime. And maybe have some bands with us. I talked last time with Tariq.
Or just play instruments. That's
what
I like about jamming.
Your friend Tariq.
Kholoui.
He was
from
here.
Yes,
and we had this idea of bringing performance with band and with people using synthesizers and controllers.
Exactly.
We have a lot of space to do that. Maybe in the future, after the summer, we will start that. So that was mainly what we wanted to talk about, synthesis and sound design, of course, using... by the way, do you use a lot of plugins?
I mean, I use more like effect plugins. I use a lot the sound toys bundle. My favorite.
You got it finally?
Not the new one. I've got the 4, Sound Toys 4. But one of my favorite processing unit is the Decapitator. Decapitator is just so fat. I put it on all the drums, on almost all the channels. It's a kind of distortion that gives you saturation.
That's also part of sound design.
Part of sound design, of course.
Exactly, using effects.
Makes it crispier or fatter, or you know, like.
That's great. We can.
And you can also modulate that distortion as well. So
to go from one one level to another, etc. And that's how you create some movement in the sound. Like rather than just have one sound, you can create some movement in it. And by the way, there's something that I got a question from a student. He was like, "What if you're playing in a big festival where the sound system is set in mono? So do you still hear this modulation of panning and stuff like that?" And that's a kind of a problem nowadays, because if you're in mono, you don't have this shift of left and right. Both channels will be in one mono coming out from all speakers at the same time. And if you guys are willing to, for example, for later on to create some very, like you said, depth, you want to go far away from the center or far away from something that has to do with left and right. Make sure where you're playing your tracks, because if you are in a big festival playing in mono, you might not have this exactly as you want, right? So we discussed also all the components, the VCF, VCO, the VCA, the global controls.
Yeah, we were also talking about the processing. There's so many ways to process a sound. Sometimes you can add a tape, just a tape plugin that gives a kind of hiss to the sound. It makes it sound like it's an old recording. There's also vinyl. Is it
Vinyl,
noise?
yeah, it's an Ableton. You have it.
Yeah, you have it. It's a
vinyl. Vinyl.
I use it a lot on the drums, the hi-hats, and mainly the hi-hats. There's also Redux.
Redux, yes.
Which is it's a kind of a bit crusher.
Yes.
That also I use on drums, like snares and hi-hats. And the toms most of the time are saturated.
You like drums?
Yeah, I like drums. I mean, drums, what makes you move, as well as the bass line. It's the groove. As long as you've got the groove and the hook, this is where you can start building up your track.
Exactly, yes. So that was it, you guys. If you have any questions, by the way, this wasn't planned to be a question and answer session. We were just giving some educational, it was an educational episode about synthesis, about sound design as well. What are the different components of a synthesizer? Because some people, they just say, come to me, what is this word, synthesizer or synthesizer? That was it. This video will be posted 2 days later, and full HD as well. With we might be including some graphs or pictures to just show you what we talked about, the sine waves, etc. And we can also be adding some links to some what do you call it? Some
information about the
that I also give to my students, those handouts or whatever we call it.
Anyways, when we will do the course, we will also give sheets to everyone so they can have a reference.
Exactly.
And we will also do a demonstration so they can make the difference between different waveforms.
What each one will sound like.
Exactly, and also the ADSR, what it does. Like, we want to make it audible,
Of course. Now we left some time, as I promised, but I told you that wasn't planned to be a Q&A session. But of course, I left some time for you guys to ask anything you want. I'm really sorry I cannot scroll now, but if you have questions, just send them now. We're still with you for the next few minutes. And if you would like to know more about synthesis or something that we didn't talk about or etc., please send them now. We're still with you. And after that, we will say goodbye.
Yes, I've seen a question before. It's someone who's asking me if I can make something digital sound analog. Of course you can. It also comes with your. You can, like I said, it's a processing. This is where you're using a digital sound and you're processing it through sometimes through many plugins, sometimes through few plugins, and it can really sound the same as
an
analog synthesizer.
And by the way, they reached now. We have a question from Hassan Hajawi, our good friend from Jordan, a very well-known DJ as well, producer. By the way, Hassan, I remember something now.
Hassan,
you remember when we started producing, me and you, that were early days, and we kept on reminding ourselves that we will stay producing music, and here we are. Thank you for joining. And what was the question?
It's so do you have any tricks to make a sound from a digital synth sound as warm as an analog?
We just said it,
of course. You can try distortion, saturation. You can also sometimes try a multiband compressor or EQ as well. It all depends of the chain of the plugins you are adding to the channel. So again, I think
because if you have
the future is going digital.
Yes.
Yeah. So again, all these instruments are not just analog, but they're also digital at the same time. So
even Jean-Michel Jarre said we have reached so far like 95% of the same quality of sound from analog to digital. This guy is an analog head, and you can trust digital nowadays with the technology, with a lot of processing power, with a lot of sampling rates, high sampling rates, sound cards, professional stuff. Technology is moving forward. And by the way, at the end of the day, if you're not performing, of course, if you want to produce a track, you're going back to the sound card. You're going back to, it's the
You're the most
PCM
welcome,
audio. Yes. It's the, you're going back to the sound card at the end of the day.
Of course,
if you're
everything
producing
goes
music.
through out of the sound card.
Exactly. So, do we have a question? Any tips on the order of effect plugins? That's a good question, because if you have them,
Listen, it all depends on what you want. Usually, if I put reverb after a delay, because a delay after reverb won't give you exactly what the delay can deliver. So it all depends. I usually start with like processing the sound. Let's say the drum, I add, let's say, a saturator. Then I put the delay, let's say, if I want to, like, I don't know, just make it a bit richer. Or sometimes a reverb, like, I just add a small ambience. So it could sound a bit like panoramic, if you want.
So the chaining is very important.
Chaining is very important,
because
yes.
if you put them in a
Listen,
certain order,
and sometimes it works. Sometimes it works to just put an echo after a reverb. It depends how much the reverb is has a tail, or how much the if it's like a big hole reverb. I don't think a delay would work on that. But it's like a very, like it's say a chamber reverb or a room verb. Usually you can still like use that delay, and usually I put the EQ at the end of the chain, or sometimes I can put it in the middle and then add another EQ to fix the other frequencies that I added with a reverb or a delay. Or
so it's a long chain.
Sometimes it goes up to 10. Few days ago I was with Rollback. We were producing high Rollback.
Rollback is a great artist friend,
great producer, yes, and a great friend. We've had 15 effect chained after each other. So what is also cool is that you can create one chain. It's like one effect that has many effects in it, and be able to control different parameters from different effects on one knob.
Yeah, that's
which is the macro. The macro.
In Ableton.
Yes, in Ableton.
Thank you, Ableton. I'm very fortunate to be with Ableton for, it's been 3 or 4 years, and Per-vurt is the official dealer for Ableton.
And many other products.
And really, guys, for those who are still using cracks, I would really recommend that you go to original.
I would also recommend that, because it bugs a lot when it's a cracked version, especially when you have also cracked plugins. I mean, I use the original version, but with the cracked plugins, it still
sometimes
bugs.
yes.
So I mean, I know it's expensive. I think you should try the plugin first, and if you really like it and you're using it a lot in your production, then you can invest
in buying the because you might not like it or whatever.
Like, for example, I'm planning on buying the new Soundtoy bundle because it's like exquisite.
I'm gonna get you 50% for it. Thank you. By the way, Ableton and so many other brands, they give Per-vurt exclusive deals. Like, for example, with Ableton, they give our students 40%, old students, and the new students, they get Ableton for free. As part of the tuition, of course, the Ableton Standard or Suite, or they can get some discount. Arturia, I salute them as well. They give 50% to our students, and so on. Loop Masters, etc.
But also Plugin, the boutique.
With Plugin Boutique as well, they give up to 50%, and so many other. We list them on the website, and that's an ethical way of also dealing with music, because at the end of the day, a lot of money is invested in creating plugins and stuff like that.
A lot of money and time.
Time, of course,
which is, I think, more important.
And they are giving you a lot of options, and
they're updating. They're up to date. Like, you know, they're always evolving and. And you know, because there's a lot of people who are giving feedbacks. You know, some are positive, some are negative. So they always try to enhance the machine, enable to give you a better result.
Great, guys. We stayed with you for 1 hour exactly. By the way, G.GOES Live is only 1 hour from now on, from 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks ago on. And this video is going to be uploaded in HD after 2 days. And my friend Elias is going to be with me once a month, as he said. I'm very happy and fortunate, and I have the honor to always have him here. Thank you, Stam.
I have the honor to be here, man. You're the most welcome.
Thank you so much. And by the way,
I hope it was informative, and stay tuned for the synthesis courses and the other G-Mohris Goes Live. And you should check it out. There's a lot of info, very important info, different feedbacks from different producers and artists, everyone, different point of views, different ways of seeing things. So for people who are interested, I think.
And by the way, if
really check it out.
If you are really also interested in seeing and witnessing this live performance act, Elias is going to play
on the 29th of July at Skin City.
As a live performance.
As Atomic Circus.
And not again.
Always have this problem. Atomic Circus with my partner Ziad. We'll be doing an hour and a half live. You should come check it out. It's going to be different from what we did at Reunion. That's it.
Great. So, thank you for being with us for the 7th episode of G.GOES Live. I had my very good friend Elias / Stamina Atomic Circus. And I will be back with you next week, of course, with a new guest. Also, we will be back with Stamina Elias next month to discuss something also very important, which we will keep for later. And until then, you guys be safe. We love you. And if you like this video and you can watch it in 2 days in HD, please share it. Share the knowledge, share the increasing awareness kind of. And we salute you. We send you all our love. Cheers.
Thank you.